Today's opening line comes from this little book that I love so much, A Study of Elizabeth Barrett Browning by Lillian Whiting. Um, this edition is from 1899. I think this is one of the oldest books I have. I'm not sure. I have some pretty close. But here is her opening line. The opening line of one of Mrs. Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese holds in condensation the complete record of all her early years. The line that runs, "I lived with visions for my company." It is an opening line that assumes the reader probably knows a little bit about the story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. There's actually, I am really surprised, there's not a lot of movies out there about her. There is one called Wimple Street or something like that. That's decent because she has a very interesting story. And why there isn't a modern version of her life, I don't know. The people that created all of the Jane Austen movies, especially the more recent ones, and the amazing cinematography around that, why is there not a movie by somebody like that? With maybe BBC has done some. I need to do a little bit more research, but basically living with visions of her company. A quick recap: she grew up disabled and in a home with an overbearing father who would not allow her and her sisters to marry, and basically kept them hostage in their own home. And but she wrote poetry and was starting to become somewhat known among other poets, but she never left the house because of her disabilities, and then started a correspondence with Robert Browning, who was also a poet at the time, and she really enjoyed his work, and he found her work, and they corresponded and fell in love through correspondence. And long story short, he convinced her to let him come visit, and they ran off. They had to sneak and run off and get married, and the rest of their life, I don't remember how many years they had together. They ended up having a son. They lived in Italy, Florence for the majority of the time, in Paris, but she never did see her family again. Her father disowned her, and I mean, she literally had to sneak out of the house to get away from her father to go marry Robert Browning. But they both continued to write poetry, and their love for each other is well known, world renowned, and she met him kind of later in life. And so that's why, she never imagined she would marry. And so that's why that opening line is about having visions, maybe daydreams about what could be. And she ended up having that dream marriage that most people dream about and probably never have. But she and Robert Browning had an amazing and passionate love for each other, and they were just well suited for each other. And it's a beautiful story in terms of persistence and waiting, and then seeing how they kind of interacted with each other. I don't know a lot. I'm still learning about them, but it is something I enjoy reading about. And I love, she was born in the early 1800s. I think it was, I saw 1806 or something like that, early 1800s. That during that Regency era. And, I'm a Jane Austen fan, so I'm a huge fan of the Regency era. And just obviously have a very romanticized and idyllic perspective of that, because the truth is there was a lot of not modern or medical things that are available. And so like clean water, they didn't have a lot of those things. And so It's easy to romanticize it, but I love that era, and what came out of that era is very deeply felt. The poetry and the writing that came out of that era was so, had a depth to it, and a reality to it that I just really love, versus a lot of the modern stuff these days. And, there are definitely exceptions. Malcolm Guite is probably my favorite current poet. As far as like authors, Wendell Berry, he also is a poet that I deeply admire, and who I would put them in that category of the Brownings and Wordsworth. And I know Austen wasn't a poet, but she was a writer, but I would put them all in that category of having this understanding of human nature, this way to express a lot of things that we find difficult expressing, who just are like in touch with their soul, with the human soul. And I have the human soul on my mind because I can't remember if I mentioned in a previous vlog post that I am going to be working, my next magazine issue is going to be around that soul, the idea of the soul. Last night I sat up in bed fairly late because I had such a download. I opened up my Bible and I just started reading some verses about the soul. And next thing I knew, I had a download. Basically, I downloaded the entire magazine edition last night. When I start working, it changes quite a bit, but at least I have like this whole flow of what I have planned so far for the magazine edition. I mean, it just came like that. And I'm at the very beginning of my research stage and my study stage. So that can change. However, for me to get this much information that quick and that quick of a download, that means I'm going to be able to go really deep on this and do some really good exploration. So I'm really kind of stuck on this idea of the soul, and the soul is so important. The Democratic Party in the 2024 election, they were like, it's the fight for the soul of America. And I found that very ironic and misplaced, to say the least, because a lot of their policies as a platform tear away at the soul. But it made me, I was like, maybe this is really amazing timing. God's timing is always perfect, to encourage people to think about what is our soul, and how do we nurture our soul? How do we make our soul flourish? What is a healthy soul, and what is it that eats away at our soul? And because we have our ideas, and it's usually based on culture, popular opinion, or our own experiences. And then there's truth. And granted that there's a lot of people who do not accept God's word as truth. And so, how do they find what is truly nurturing to their soul? There can be this surface level of soothing of, where it's not really tending to our soul, it's just tending to our flesh. Our soul is much deeper than that. And so I think we get mixed up, soul and flesh. Our flesh feels good, and we have that hit of dopamine or whatever it is that makes us feel good, and we think we've just nurtured our soul, but in reality, we've robbed it. In the long term, it's been robbed because, you get that hit of, I call it the hit of happy. I mentioned it in the Peace magazine. A lot of times we confuse peace for a hit of happy, and which is, just very temporary, and then it fades. But peace doesn't fade. And the same thing with soul. We think we're tending to our soul, but really are we chipping away at it instead of building it up? So that's what I'm going to be working on in preparation for this next magazine issue. So, man, 10 minutes goes by so fast. All right, see you tomorrow.